Cool. Also, thank you especially to Professor Janssen and Genevieve. I think our three talks dovetail quite nicely today, which is quite exciting. So I'll be sharing some ideas around what some of our goals have been at school in the English department and during this time, and why those are the goals and what we've discovered thus far. So I'll be talking to my three focus areas. I'd like to nod to some limitations, which I think is only appropriate, and then conclude. Right, so I started with this idea of the online classroom community, and it's really come up so clearly today. You know, we all know that learning is a social endeavor and that people learn through their interactions with others and the world around them. And so a learning community is a very powerful educational practice. But we have, for the last 5 months, been in the business of figuring out how to establish that kind of learning community online. And we certainly recognized its role in the learning process when trends in our first semester assessment suggested that students were actually struggling with skills which had not been processed socially. And that idea has come up quite strongly today. And so we've tried to adopt the community of inquiry theoretical framework focused on the interplay between social, teacher, and cognitive presence. So really what this means is, or how we understand it, is your social presence. It's about getting them to overlap the student's ability to assert their social and emotional selves, while teacher presence is really, I'm not going to focus a lot on that today. It's about, we know it, the design and instruction and facilitation of our courses, and then our role in demanding cognitive presence from our students, their ability to construct meaning through inquiry and dialogue and reflection. All right, so these are some of the lessons that we've learned around building social presence. I mean, essentially, we're all grappling with how to make a space feel human or social. How do we go without reading body language, inferences, tone in the online space where you're lucky if you get to see your students? At worst, you don't. And one of the lessons we've learned is the need to over communicate and to use audio as much as possible, to be personal with students, to make sure that we bring as much of who they are into any interaction that we have with them, to try to find them doing good so that we can praise, motivate, and recognize where they're doing well, sharing the best examples of their own work with them in classes with each other, or even as a grade, has worked really, really well. And then, as informal as it may seem, in an effort to try to create and establish tone in any written communication, particularly when you are in an online lesson or when you are sharing an online chat space, to get students and teachers to use bold, underline, emojis, color, anything that's going to try and give a sense of tone in our writing. And then to signal the sense of our community, to just signal in any way that we can, verbally and in the activities we do, that this is a community space. Now, these things used to be just a teacher's responsibility, but they can't be anymore. And so, to borrow from some of what Genevieve was saying, you know, this idea of using social media, but also any other tools and activities for interaction that is not just instructionally driven, is key. And gamification has been a wonderful way to do that. There are such fantastic places to find templates for this kind of thing, whether it's Kia or the UNCW Edu Games or Kahoot even, where teachers can use it for their students or get them to use it amongst themselves. And we noticed how important it was becoming to get students to increase the number of times that they shared their lived experiences. I mean, think about it. At school, you're used to running into someone in the corridors, touching base, seeing them across the cafeteria and noticing you need to have a quick chat. And now we're in a position where we need to provide virtual spaces for that kind of informal communication. So it's really come down to sharing, getting students to share their work through collaborative activities, designing projects that actually require that students work together, perhaps outside of class time, and then bring the outside world into the online teaching space, where we celebrate any achievements, special moments, activities, anything that is a deliberate focus on class community. In the beginning of terms, we have set aside enough time for personalized introductions where students post bios, avatars, write up about their own experiences at home, anywhere, any place where they can share their favorite activities or elements, anything that gets them to share who they really are helps them be seen. And that links to the importance of trying to see the individual. Now, as teachers, we know that part of recognizing the individual is also about recognizing where they are academically. And so it's been quite useful for us to use pre-assessments to determine students' prior knowledge, which has allowed us to teach for mastery and encourage choice in their assignments, demonstrating to students that their next level of engagement in a module is based on the mastery that they've demonstrated in the previous phase. has been very useful for them to feel that they've been progressing, and it speaks to differentiated instruction. Also, designing activities that allow them to make connections to other parts of their lives it's been a great way for them to feel that they are being seen. The second overlap I'm not going to spend too much time on is teacher presence, design, instruction, and facilitation. One thing I would like to share, which we found very useful, is recognizing that if we're going to try to recurriculize in a more modular way, knowing exactly what the building blocks are of an online lesson is very, very helpful. So I'm just going to toggle between these two. So, I mean, this is just an example, but having department discussions where you talk about what these building blocks are and getting teachers to understand that once you know what they are, they can be put together in meaningful ways, but many, many different ways, as long as you know exactly what your objective is, and then invite teachers to investigate what possible online tools are available. And then that third overlap about cognitive presence speaks to that while teachers are using all of these building blocks to design the learning experience, it's also essential that they consider how to demand cognitive presence, making sure that students are there. And an instructional model that may prove effective for this is checking that students are given the opportunity to utilize these 5 verbs throughout their modules. Because when they're doing this, they are active participants and directors of their own learning, and they're very engaged in the learning community. And that ultimately is going to support the development of agency. When we're talking about agency, I'm talking about the sense of I can contribute because I know I have value and I belong somewhere where I want to make a difference. The OECD has listed student agency as a learning goal for 2030. It is rooted in the belief that students have the ability and the will to positively influence their lives and change the world around them. It is the capacity to set a goal, reflect, and act responsibly to effect change. And now more than ever, this is what we want. We want to create conditions where students feel empowered to act in the best interests of their community. But schools also need to cause learning to happen and know that it did, which is why assessment, however formative, is somehow still essential. And then in this current paradigm, where traditional teaching, learning, and assessment is not always a suitable mechanism, we do think that the social project is both the most valuable contribution to our communities and to our students' development, because grades are not the single metric by which students can be successful. And if we accept this challenge, what are some of the things that we're seeing in our students? We're seeing them understand the importance of self-determination. We're seeing some of them understand how to bring an entire system into collaboration to achieve a goal and action change that they have conceptualized. We're seeing increased observation and empathy, and we see them recognizing that they have the skills to be and make a change. So what are some of the things that we're doing that are leading to this? We're starting to value and develop student voice a lot more. There's no point really in discussing, specifically under the current circumstances, the curriculum and its rollout without giving a voice to students who know what happens in the classroom and what works and what doesn't work. So while this is a natural outcome of us chatting to them and engagement with students, we found it immensely augmented with surveys and reflective activities. Secondly, we're trying to build in opportunities in our activities and curriculum for peer-to-peer support. So again, another survey from the OECD in April augmented some of our own findings about the value of peer-to-peer support in the hybrid space. We find students solving their own and each other's tech problems with far more ease than we may have thought possible. They've admitted to valuing interaction as much as possible and really enjoying online discussions and active documents which make their learning visible. We're finding a number of students peer tutoring not only each other at school, but they find themselves in positions where they're tutoring family and friends in schools where grades have not yet returned to routine classes. And new student groups are being established to meet and discuss both educational and, of course, the burning social issues that are arising during the pandemic. And these have benefited immensely from support from school management and relevant teachers. Students have also made us aware of some pitfalls for our teaching design. So they have admitted that they struggle with pre-recorded content alone because it's difficult for them to focus on. They have called out for time to adjust. They have admitted that it is hard to motivate themselves to learn without their peers present. And they've admitted to suggesting that we change the pace so that they can complete their work, not just work that's assigned as homework, but the flipped classroom actually allows them to work alongside each other and with teachers present where possible. And then we're trying to design learning opportunities that are based on social interaction that are a little bit more authentic. So most of our modules will start with working groups and online discussion where students explore, but then we want them to elaborate on their learning by engaging in multimodal activities outside and away from the screen, where they then bring that learning to the space and investigate it. Vlogging and blogging has proved very real and very positive for them. Writing, transactional writing, especially where they can produce pieces that are ready for email and publication and public consumption, which is going to have an impact on the world, and opportunities for them to evaluate their own learning and their lived experience through reflective writing and speaking. And then lastly, if we are lucky enough, and if students and families have the agency and the ability to do something outside of the classroom and in the community, then it's really our job to encourage and support those students by amplifying their voices. And if you think about what those kinds of projects can be, they really are the most authentic learning experiences students could possibly have, pandemic or not, because they bridge the gap between academic knowledge and concrete application. And then I don't think that it would be fair, as has so clearly come out, to have any discussion about this context without focusing on the importance of teacher and student wellness. Because being explicit about how important this is during this time has been greatly beneficial in establishing a trust relationship between everyone involved in managing teaching and learning at school. But there are some other aspects that we found to be key. Routine as far as possible, but within reason. I'll get back to that later. Our students have really appreciated continued assessment. It's been a tool for encouraging accountability and checking for understanding. But most importantly, really has been staying responsive to the time it takes to adjust and then being flexible. So it's a mistake to think that students need to spend 6 hours in front of a screen to continue learning. They don't. Students are currently expending cognitive energy on managing massive mental and emotional turmoil. And so perhaps modular learning is more suited to this context, as well as student self-pacing. Also, as difficult as this is, we can recognize that the flexibility afforded by online learning can be a strength and not a weakness. One of the most important takeaways we've gotten from working closely with our students is recognizing the need for time away from the screen and online learning. And this can mean asynchronous learning opportunities, or sometimes even the kind of midterm break that lets them be home. It's valuable and it's necessary. It is necessary to give even the tech-enabled time away from the tech. And this kind of thinking can produce an overlap of activities in which both the high-tech and low and no-tech context could engage. I focus on literacy, for example, with reading circles and student-generated feedback, students teaching each other, getting them to construct and interview people. Construction that is both real and digital can be part of the learning. Getting them involved in multimodal activities where they investigate, discover, document, and then question what they've experienced is very real. And teaching wellness practices explicitly. I don't want to do this without nodding to what we all know to be the limitations. So we know that the pandemic has emphasized the digital divide in and through education. And we're in a context where hybrid teaching is our reality and where we need to cater for both those who have access to virtual or real teachers and classrooms and to those who do not. Furthermore, there is evidence to suggest that pure online education benefits middle-class students more than those who are dependent on the compensatory supports offered by traditional schooling, and this cannot be forgotten in our forward planning. However, if hybrid teaching and learning is here to stay, then the longer-term or next pandemic solutions must include investing now in making sure that poverty-stricken areas have access to bandwidth and infrastructure to support the next transition to online learning. And perhaps it all does just call for a reorientation of the education system from a focus on content to social skills and human development. To conclude, we do not know enough about teaching online, but we are learning a lot and we are learning with our students. And a lot of what we're learning aligns with what research by Melanie Smits and other educational researchers in disaster management areas suggest. Number one, that it is important to try to make school feel real and to help students feel connected. And so perhaps a social presence model may be the answer for this. Her research also outlines how crisis changes behavior and culture, and that we need to change the learning culture, recognizing that it will change forever after this. And a positive change would be increasing teaching for student agency. And finally, that teachers and schools play a primary role in helping students unpack the impact of this disruption in their lives and in helping them handle the trauma of this pandemic. And that we must allow for the surfacing of issues, have the difficult academic time consuming conversations about the experiences, and create a space for students to communicate, because we need to prioritize their wellness as much as their academic education.